Ladies and gentlemen, I join you today from Washington at a very critical time for the US-India relationship as Prime Minister Modi arrives here for the Quad Summit and a bilateral with President Joe Biden. But the big question, of course, is what will happen on the 5th of November when America goes to vote, and how will it impact the ties between the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy? Over the next over the last 25 years, the United States-India relationship has undergone various changes. Today, it is a deep partnership, including in the defense and security areas. Of course, structural factors led to the two nations to cooperate across the regimes of presidents as different as Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden now. For sure, there have been divergences which currently include India's partnership with Russia and certain US policies in parts of South Asia. But both Washington and New Delhi have adapted its approaches towards the new administration's priorities and preferences, leading to not just cooperation but deepening of ties. To discuss more on the impact of US elections on the Indo-US relations, I'm joined by Dr. Kenneth Winstein, former ambassador and president, CEO of Hudson Institute, currently the Japan chair of the Hudson Institute. Welcome to the show. Also joining me is Elizabeth Threlkeld, senior fellow and director at the South Asia Program Stimson Center. Welcome to the show. Next to her is Dhruva Jaishankar. Everybody knows you back home, Dhruva. And he heads the ORF chapter in the United States of America. And we also have David Tafuri, former foreign affairs advisor to President Obama, joining this show. First things first, the big question on everybody's mind tonight is going to be who's winning the election, so that we can then debate what the impact on India is going to be. So am I going to get everybody to look into the crystal ball and say, who do you think?
Well, look, it's going to be very close. We know that. That's one thing we can say for sure. And it seems ever since President Biden stepped out of the race that things are trending more in the Democrats' direction. But I think at the end of the day, President Donald Trump will be reelected on November 5th as president, and he's got an advantage in the Electoral College, and he's able to reach out to significant parts of the Democratic Party base that are now trending increasingly towards him, whether it being among Hispanics, among African-American males, among Jewish Americans as well.
Amazing. I love people who stick their necks out. So he's rooting for President Donald Trump coming back again. And where do you think you're going to put your money on?
Well, I respectfully disagree with my colleague here. The momentum is with Harris, and it's possible that momentum could change, but the last big event that gave Donald Trump the chance to change that momentum was the debate. And he completely failed. If anything, he caused people to support Harris more. If the election was held today, according to the polls, Harris would win. She would win Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan, and the electoral vote in Nebraska. I think it will stay close like that, but with the momentum comes more fundraising. She's raising much more money than Donald Trump, more excitement among her base, more volunteers, and the most important thing on Election Day, get out the vote. I think more people are going to come out for Harris because there's more excitement around her campaign, and Donald Trump's campaign is really stalling out. He's not really coming up with any new ideas. His rallies are sagging in support, and I think that trend is going to continue to Election Day.
Okay, Elizabeth. So we have one vote for Donald Trump, one for Kamala Harris. Where do you stand? Do you think debates and polls after the debates actually decide which way the result is going?
You know, I think what we can see is there is a lot of energy in the election now. There's a lot of attention. There is new questions being asked that had we zoomed back in time a couple of months ago, this would have been a very different conversation. And so seeing that and seeing who does come out to vote really is going to be decisive. Just for the benefit of your viewers, though, I'm sure many of them are familiar with this. We talk a lot about the Electoral College, right? This is not a popular vote of who's going to be the one who gets the most votes across the country. This is where you really have to zoom in, not just to specific states, specific counties, specific districts. And so much of that work is ongoing, knocking on doors, that sort of local level politicking. And we'll have to see who wins the ground game. I'm not going to come down one way or another.
Okay, so there's a fence sitter there, and Dhruva, dump this down and get me the similarities between the American elections and the Indian ones.
So I think there's some similarities. I think a lot of differences as well. But I would also be a fence sitter just as an observer of this election. I think it's 50-50 effectively. Marginal changes here and there will make a big difference. This really comes down to 7 states. We're very different from India in that respect. Even in those 7 states, it'll be a few key constituencies that will really, whether they turn up to vote or not, will matter. So I think we're looking at a few lakh votes here or there making a difference in the outcome. I think it's a bit premature and to make a firm prediction. But just a few things I would look at. If I was a Republican, I would be concerned about the numbers in North Carolina and Georgia, places where Harris is running very close, and these were considered 2 months ago. Trump had a very sizable lead in these places. If I was a Democrat, I'd be worried about Pennsylvania, and Trump has a tendency to underpoll in polls. So, in the last 2 elections in Florida, he did much better in the last election than the polls indicated. So I would be a bit cautious looking at the polls as well, but I think it's very, very close.
Okay, so now on the eve of Prime Minister Modi's visit and the Quad meeting and a bilateral meeting slated there, how do you think, Harris winning or Trump winning can impact India? Will it have different meanings in the Indo-US ties as the personalities who take office, are tossed up?
So yes and no, and I'm sure my colleagues here would have slightly different views on this. I think there's a lot of steadiness to the US-India relationship. We've seen this under successive presidencies. India doesn't have the same stakes. I mean, India's not a formal US ally. It's not concerned about withdrawal of US troops or even military aid being cut or things like that. So I don't think the broader trajectory will change fundamentally. Even with the Quad, it restarted under Donald Trump, and Biden has taken it further. Vice President Harris has participated and engaged with all the Quad countries as well. So I would be sort of optimistic about that. I do think there will be some meaningful changes both ways if Trump is elected or Harris. With Trump, I think we'll have some questions about trade and immigration, and maybe we can get more detail about that. But even with Harris, she may adopt a slightly different posture and put a different emphasis on different issues than Biden has. Biden came to the job with a lot more foreign policy experience, with a few key advisors who have helped direct his presidency, and she doesn't have the same experience. So I think we're up for some minor changes, but the overall trajectory won't change.
David, let me ask you this one. In real terms, given the fact that Kamala Harris has actually, had a different view of the manner in which she's looked at, let's say, political issues like Kashmir, India's relationship with Russia. These are some of the issues that sometimes come up in the bilateral ties between the two sides. How important are these going to be going forward? And are there going to be different approaches, if it were Donald Trump who would win or Kamala Harris who comes to office?
I think there will be different areas of disagreement between the U.S. and India depending on whether it's Harris or Trump who is elected. If it's Harris, as you mentioned, there's more likely to be some disagreement about human rights issues, particularly around Kashmir and also around treatment of Muslims in India. There's also likely to be further disagreement over Ukraine and over India's relationship with Russia. Modi warmly embraced Putin last month when they met. I think that's more of a concern if Harris is the president, and I think that India is buying a lot of oil from Russia, and as the U.S. and our NATO partners start to rethink about how do we put more pressure on Russia, that could be a problem. Right now it's okay, but India is not with the other democracies around the world in terms of strong support, vocal support for Ukraine. I know Modi met with Zelensky last month as well, but he's been neutral, and if anything, neutral leaning towards Russia because he's allowing the Russian economy to continue by buying so much oil. So those are the areas that will be chiefly potential disagreements between the U.S. and India if Harris is elected. If Trump is elected, I think it'll be around tariffs and immigration, as my colleague said.
Dhruva, do you think India buying oil from Russia is such a deal breaker, given the fact that we have our internal requirements and our own people to consider?
I mean, I'm more sanguine on that issue. I think actually the Biden administration has been quite understanding of India's purchasing of Russian oil. Prior to the war, less than 3% of Indian oil came from Russia. It was not cost competitive. There are no pipelines from Russia to India. After the war, there's been a surge in global prices, and particularly as Europe has shifted from previously buying from Russia to buying from West Asia, from the Middle East, which was India's largest source of oil. So I think that's going to have to be balanced by questions about inflation, which is a very hot political issue here. If India suddenly, let's say hypothetically, India was to stop buying Russian oil tomorrow, the inflationary pressures on all major economies, including India, including the United States, will be quite high. So I think the Biden administration has been quite conscious of that and relatively understanding, and I think that there'll be multiple considerations there as well.
So, Elizabeth, on one issue, I think there can be common ground, especially in the Quad meetings and going forward Indo-US relations, is how to deal with China. And what do you see, in the short term, in the Quad meeting, what comes out of it, and in the slightly medium term, depending on who wins these elections, are there going to be any calibrations in the approach that India and United States have had on the issue of China?
Yeah, I think the China dynamic is so central to many of these conversations that we're having, and both sides do view the China challenge as one of, if not the, definitive foreign policy agenda item in what's come to be known as the Indo-Pacific. Obviously, it was the Trump administration that debuted the Indo-Pacific strategy, and in many ways, the Biden administration has started to carry forward that work, albeit more in consultation and partnership with partners and allies. But as Dhruva mentioned, the Quad was restarted under the Trump administration. And so I think this is an area where we will see continuity. That is going to remain a focus. It might be in tone, right? There are differences. And I think the other important thing to recognize here is China gets a vote, not in the U.S. election, but in terms of what happens next. And with the U.S.-India partnership, as much as we talk about the progress that both sides have made over the past 20, 25 years, I think it's actually China's actions that have done just as much, if not more, to bring the two sides together. And so we saw in 2020, obviously, the Galwan incident, which continues. And so depending on how China acts in the coming year, in the coming 2 years and beyond, that I think is going to play a role in how this goes forward. Getting down to brass tacks, obviously the Biden administration has been talking about finding a floor in the U.S.-China relationship, making sure that there are those lines of communication open to avoid escalation, to avoid a worsening crisis scenario, for example. I would imagine a Harris administration would continue that, and perhaps Trump might take a harder line. But going forward, I do think that this is an area of bipartisan consensus, to the extent that we can even point to one in polarized Washington these days, where there remains great concern on China.
Well, we're very used to polarized matters back home in India. But let me ask you, the question is always stated that with the Democrats, if Kamala Harris were to win, there will be more stability in the Indo-US relations. With Trump, you'll be guessing because he's known to, or at least that's the way his perception goes, that he can change policies, relations at the drop of a hat one fine morning. How do you see that impacting India, and especially tariffs, which have been quite central to the engagement with India? Do you think it's going to be more predictable, given the chemistry between Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump? Can some of these issues be sorted out were he to win these elections?
Yeah, look, first, I have to challenge your perception of President Trump. I think he is someone who, he's not a policy person. He does tend to think out loud when he's doing policy, and I think that creates, for some people, a tendency to see turbulence when there isn't turbulence, and it creates misperceptions. But I think India has been blessed by the Trump administration. I don't think anyone else would have given Prime Minister Modi the ability to do what he has been able to do in Kashmir without the Trump administration. There was not a word of criticism. And I think if Harris had been president, or if Biden had been president during that time, I think it would have been a much stormier moment in the relationship. To be sure, on trade, absolutely the Trump administration, U.S. Trade Representative Leithizer removed the development trade preferences on India. Obviously, that was something India did not like, but the partnership is deep, it's broad. The personal chemistry, Prime Minister Modi has to be one of President Trump's closest friends in the world, especially since the assassination of Prime Minister Abe on July 8th, 2022. It makes Modi even more important. So I am very optimistic about the U.S.-India relationship under President Trump. I think that the broad lines are in place. Sure, the president wants to create a more balanced trade relationship with our key trade partners. Certainly, on immigration, I have to disagree in the sense that President Trump has talked about the fact that we need skilled workers in our country. He's even talked about giving college graduates green cards if they graduate from U.S. universities. So on that part of immigration, I think India will be fine. But I would actually be more concerned in some ways about a Harris administration, which I think Vice President Harris's instincts are to the left of where President Biden's instincts are. And I think that could cause challenges in the U.S.-India relationship moving forward.
You got me wrong. I wasn't saying that Donald Trump hasn't been good for India. What I was saying is the perception here in the United States is that, he can change things, when he wakes up in the morning, in the manner in which he's been dealing on issues, on policies, and with countries. Of course, the chemistry between President Trump and Modi has been legendary. Howdy Modi had quite a lot of debate and discussion back home in India. And even now, there is an upcoming meeting, I understand, and President Trump has already gone to town about it. Dhruva Jaishankar, you see something there. Some people on social media even saying, seems like Modi's picked a side.
I think I tend not to predict meetings and people's schedules and things until we actually see people arrive. I think that all of these, you have a presidential candidate, you have a prime minister, these are all people who are quite busy. What I think we did see is former President Trump say publicly that Prime Minister Modi is coming to meet him. I believe on the Foreign Secretary yesterday said that no meeting has been confirmed to date. So let's see what happens. What we do know is that Prime Minister Modi will be meeting with President Biden at President Biden's home in Wilmington, Delaware. So let's see what happens. I think the the broad position, I think, is India has shown that it's willing and capable of working with U.S. presidents regardless of their political persuasion, and that, again, the relationship, as many of my co-panelists have said, the relationship has so many different aspects to it that even when some aspects decline in importance, others rise up. Trump, to give one example, I doubt we will see a Quad working group on clean energy under a Trump administration, but we also saw a real spike in LNG exports from the U.S. to India under Trump. So again, we'll find different issue sets to work with, I think. So that's what we have to look forward to.
David, do you think on policies, especially American policy with regard to Afghanistan, how they're looking at Bangladesh, do you think there can be a more closer discussion, debate going forward between the U.S. and India, considering these are areas that are, geopolitically very important for India? And do you think there's enough common ground, and will that change depending on who the man in White House or the woman in White House will be?
I do. I think it can, and I think it's really important to the United States that we have a closer relationship with India. You framed it in your introduction. It's the world's largest democracy and the world's oldest democracy. And big picture, what is happening around the world is countries that are democracies are becoming closer to each other and their alliances are strengthening, and countries that are not democracies, chiefly led by Russia and China, which have repressive regimes, which don't support rule of law, are becoming closer to each other with other satellite countries around them that they support, like Iran, like North Korea, like Syria, and the world is dividing in that way. And that's why it's confounding, I think, for Americans or for those of us who do foreign policy, because we're not clear where India is in that. And it's very important for the United States and the other countries that are in the democracy alliance to lure India over to our side. It is the largest democracy. There's so much opportunity for India. Its economy is going to become stronger. Its military is going to become stronger. And so we need to have India with us, especially as these tensions between the democracies and Russia and China increase over the next few years, with many issues unresolved, like Taiwan and like Ukraine.
I guess I would describe Modi, he, like Donald Trump, is one of these outside-the-box thinkers who the rules of policy are not set in stone. Just because things have been done traditionally for a long time doesn't mean they're done that way. In my mind, he is a historic figure in India for the change that he has brought. And I think he is widely respected among policymakers here in our country.
Presented by Airtel Extreme Fiber.
Side it is on, do you think it's ambiguous? I think Prime Minister Modi has very clearly said he's against war.
Well, on that front, I mean, I think, look, India is on India's side, right? And this is the kind of world we live in today. I think, looking out at the world from India's perspective, we have a slightly different worldview naturally. And I think we do see a competitive relationship between India and China, including, we've had clashes on the border, we've had a mobilization there, we have our differences with Pakistan also, obviously. But partly for other reasons, the historical legacy, we don't have any direct conflicts of interest with Russia. Obviously, again, that's a broad relationship. There are areas where there's more convergence, areas where there's less so. But I think a bigger concern, is for India, a closer Russia-China relationship is something to be concerned about. And that translates into the increased military capabilities for China in one respect. Also for the balance of power in Eurasia. And so I think India has been communicating that, look, we want to keep, we have a historical relationship with Russia. We want to keep that channel with Moscow open. And that should not come at the expense of our relationship with Europe, with Ukraine, with the United States, and with others. So, at the same time as if India has been importing oil from Russia, we've also had deepening of relations with the European Union, Trade and Technology Council. We've had deepening of relations with the US and the Quad. And as Prime Minister Modi showed when he went to Ukraine, he can also have a constructive bilateral relationship with Ukraine as well. So, I think that's quite clear. I just think it's just from a very different, the world looks very different, sitting from New Delhi than it does from Washington.
Absolutely, because the geopolitics of the region is something India experiences on a day-to-day basis, and for a long time, and I'm talking from the people's perspective, America trying to balance India and Pakistan didn't go down well with the Indians. So, but people understood that America was looking at its own interests in the region and balancing these things out, just like currently India is doing with both Russia and Ukraine, and taking care of its own its own people back home, where inflation, etc., big issues. But there's one area where I think in the Quad there can be a great amount of, strides that can be made, which is in the field of biotechnology cooperation, which can be in the field of, let's say, semiconductor technology transfer, U.S. investments in India, and all of that. How do you see, Elizabeth, all of this going forward? And will there be different approaches depending on who gets into White House?
Yeah, I think COVID really was a wake-up call in terms of supply chains and the vulnerabilities that exist there. India presents a remarkable opportunity in terms of its market size and the latent capacity that's there. We're seeing this play out, sometimes in fits and starts, but there's been really notable momentum in this space. And I would point to not just the U.S., India, or the Quad, but what India is doing unilaterally in developing these relationships. Look at how ties between India and Taiwan have grown in the semiconductor space. Likewise, Singapore is a really interesting conversation to be had there. And so I think there is opportunity. The Quad is one of those non-security compacts where it is much more focused on public goods provision. And so any time that you can find both an alignment of interests and of capabilities, which I think we do see in this space in the Quad, there is a moment of opportunity there that I think would be something that either administration would look to push forward and take advantage of. Obviously, that could have a different tone and tenor depending on who comes to the White House, how things play out around the world. But on that level of cooperation, I think it actually could provide some useful ballast and perhaps insulation against some of those other trading pressures, conversations about tariffs and all of that. So look for those opportunities, move in those directions, create those positive aspects of the relationship and that momentum to hopefully insulate against some other pressures that might come up.
Well, in the end, let me ask you, Kenneth, how would you describe Modi and Modi-American relations?
Boy, wow. Well, I guess I would describe Modi. He, like Donald Trump, is one of these outside-the-box thinkers who the rules of policy are not set in stone. Just because things have been done traditionally for a long time doesn't mean they're done that way. In my mind, he is a historic figure in India for the change that he has brought. And I think he is widely respected among policymakers here in our country. I think we would like to see more progress, as Elizabeth outlined, on the economic front in India. We see an incredible Indian diaspora in the United States. It is extraordinary, the number of Indian Americans who are Indians who are CEOs of major American companies. The list is long. It is extraordinarily impressive, and I think we would like to see more economic reform in India. We'd like to see India itself sort of step up to become a critical partner on not just in the software sector where it already is, but in the high-tech sector, and to join with us in a more secure way so that our supply chains are less threatened as they have been in the past, whether because of dependence on authoritarian regimes. So I think that the more Modi can do in that sense, that's the unfinished piece in my mind of the Modi agenda, which is let's bring India into the 21st century with the right kind of infrastructure, drawing on the incredible human capital that is really unmatched, not just for its size, but for its capabilities. And that if he can focus on that and move India forward in that direction, that would really make him a truly great leader for India and would do a lot for the Quad, would do a lot for U.S.-India relations, and would do a lot for India-Europe relations as well.
And David, how do you describe Modi and, you know, the last 10 years, the impending 5 years, and the dynamics between America and India?
I think they're pretty good. There are definitely issues where we have some concerns about Modi, but I think either administration, whether it's a Harris administration or a Trump administration, are going to be very hopeful and supportive of him. They want to see him address some of the internal issues in India, like economic inequality. You want to make sure that there's not an erosion of democracy. There was an election in June. Want to make sure people are continue to be encouraged to vote. Want to make sure there's not an erosion of protections for minorities in India. Those are the things that we want, that either administration will likely be hoping for in India internally, with the Harris administration likely to be more vocal about them than a Trump administration. And then principally, we want to see India be a stronger security partner for us. The Quad is one aspect of that. Another is helping us deal with international crises like Ukraine. The issue with what India is doing with Russia, it's not that India is buying Russian oil. It's that it's buying Russian oil above the price cap that most other modern democracies around the world have agreed to. And that I do think is going to be an area of concern going forward, especially for a Harris administration, that's going to need to be addressed, because if the Harris administration wants to work things out in Ukraine, it's not just a matter of getting more weapons to Ukraine, it's a matter of putting more economic pressure on Russia, and the principally Russian economy is dependent upon oil, and that oil is being bought by China and India.
Well, but India has its own position, its own audiences to take care of, and the recent elections in India has actually confirmed the fact that democracy is alive and kicking. Fair elections and fair results have come up. Well, we're hoping to look at the same thing happening in the United States, because that's what binds us together, our democratic values, and the test of time that these values stay, live, and just be alive all the time. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for joining me on this very interesting discussion, and I hope you will come back and share with us your views when the results are out. Thank you very much.
Presented by Airtel Extreme Fiber. Get super fast speeds and unlimited entertainment.